Living in the diaspora is weird. You find yourself in a limbo between two worlds, not really belonging here nor there, not fully feeling at home wherever you end up going. You're often misunderstood by your compatriots, either by ignorance or malice, but you also tend to misunderstand and judge those who are quote-unquote left behind, while simultaneously struggling to integrate into the unknown promised land. There's more than enough of superstition and stereotypes surrounding immigrants as it is, and as a first-generation one myself, I've seen my fair share of implicit microaggressions and distrust coming from all sides alike for various obscure reasons. The doppelganger lifestyle of the average diaspora dweller is filled with many antagonisms with their old compatriots, but also with the locals of their new home, both of whom express a dose of suspicion and distrust. So, with the deterioration of living standards in Eastern European countries following the collapse of socialism, explored in this video of mine, serving as a precondition for this era of rapid brain drain and tragic rise in immigration rates from countries of the imperial periphery, further explored in this video, understanding the inherent sources of these contradictions and conflicts is imperative. So if you've ever wondered about the trials and tribulations in the life of that aunt of yours from Germany, or childhood friend or cousin who moved to the US, this video should hopefully give you some useful insights and worthwhile conclusions about the curious phenomenon of immigration and the diaspora, which, despite having been an integral part of the human experience since the dawn of time, has recently been reaching concerning proportions and deserves to be talked about. So, depending on when you moved abroad, whether it was as a kid with your parents, a young adult, a parent yourself, or perhaps born there as a second-generation immigrant, your experience will of course vary. There are many nuances and different perspectives which cannot be reconciled into one commentary, but I think I wouldn't be lynched for saying that no matter the circumstances, a universal problem that all diaspora residents share would be that of belonging, or a lack thereof. Especially in the case of those who moved young or were born outside of the mainland, the struggle of feeling at home, both in your country of residence and in your homeland far away, can be paralyzing. When visiting your family and friends in the homeland, many gastarbeiteri can agree that, as time goes by, alienation from the old environment, from family and friends, from the social life of that country, becomes increasingly acute and eventually begins to strangle the initially innocent longing and melancholy that is felt in the first few years. Your new environment becomes primarily tied to work and everyday life, whereas holidays are often reserved for the old world, the memorable special moments with family and old friends. The old environment, where you struggle to make ends meet, becomes an innocent synthetic version of that formerly cruel place where your main objective now is to relax and spend money you earned elsewhere, which often comes across as arrogant and decadent in the eyes of your peers, who might throw a glance of cynicism and even envy. It feels weird to see people caught up in things that, from your distance perspective, maybe don't really matter in the grand scheme of things and might seem pointless to you. Things change rapidly, life's responsibilities catch up with you, and the ability to keep up with the everyday political and social life of your homeland becomes a challenge. The more you integrate into the diaspora, the more you lose touch with the lifestyles, mindsets, and habits of your old compatriots. If you happen to be born in the diaspora, keeping pace with those and trying to fit in is exhausting either way, and may even come across as desperate and pathetic to the locals. And the locals, well, they do hold quite a few stereotypes and superstitions about those who moved abroad, often warranted by the embarrassing behavior of certain types of diaspora people that everyone hates. The stereotypical show-offs, hoarders, and petty bourgeois flexers who return to their village in a shiny new BMW, blasting obnoxious music, throwing around money, talking down to the locals. Thanks to this obnoxious minority, all of us get to enjoy the fun stereotypes and are often looked at with the same kind of contempt and judgment. Besides that, some of the more nationalistically inclined individuals do not spare their words about sinful greed and national betrayal of the cowardly traitors of his homeland who sold their soul for money. accusations which are hopefully self-evidently preposterous. On the other hand, however, a reasonable amount of expats have a very condescending and dishonest attitude towards their peers who were quote-unquote left behind. Often infected with the disease of self-hatred and internalized Orientalism, such people tend to ruthlessly bash their own culture of origin, conceivably primitive national and social habits, internalizing the racist and Orientalist attitudes of his new home country towards himself. Attitudes that subconsciously start seeping in when comparing his people with the seemingly industrious, conscientious, and civilized Germans, French, Americans, or Australians. But more on that later. He nonetheless looks down on his old countrymen as poor sheeple who weren't capable of seizing the opportunity to escape the shithole, ignoring both the fact that not everyone can move abroad and that not everyone wants to. Maybe some people don't have it as bad as you did, or do not have the same expectations from life, which is okay. Besides, you'll hear certain unlikable types of diaspora people crying how it's so hard over there, how it's not worth it to move abroad, and break your back cleaning toilets while simultaneously flexing at every possible occasion. They are essentially gatekeeping the possibility of moving abroad for other people by fear-mongering and presenting themselves as a victim of inhumane working hours, which they often impose on themselves for the sake of being able to flex with shiny facades and lion statues in their home village. So ultimately, misunderstandings, misconceptions, and superstitions between the diaspora and mainland become prevalent enough that many of those who moved abroad would admit that feeling at home back at your old home is not as easy as it sounds. On the other hand, many people struggle to adapt to the visibly different lifestyle, customs, traditions, cultural norms, and expectations, to the lifestyle patterns, style of humor, or living conditions that might await them in the midst of what can only be labeled as a cultural shock of moving westward. Some are more capable and willing to quote-unquote integrate themselves into the host nation, but many opt to do the minimum necessary integration and communication with their environment, while organically forming parallel societies of people with what you can call a quote-unquote migration background. What is born here is essentially an entire subculture of expats who romanticize their struggle, nostalgia, and melancholy through surprisingly popular songs and movies that normalize leaving everything behind, looking for a more decent life. Being part of the diaspora struggle suddenly became cool and seen as an honorable extension of the miserable fight for a decent life, which started the day you were born in that godforsaken peripheral shithole. Nonetheless, these kinds of social formations are extremely prevalent and are, in effect, a straight reflection of both the mistrust and insecurity, but also unwillingness to adapt to a foreign and strange new environment, instead subconsciously sticking to people of a more familiar socioeconomic background. Socializing with the local population just seems much harder than finding a common language with other immigrants, regardless of their national origin. This is expectedly often sprinkled with the sour aftertaste of collectively experiencing very subtle and calculated, but also blatantly open displays of racism, xenophobia, and outright fascism, all of which leave behind a feeling of being silently and politely judged, excluded, and even hated. Thus, feeling at home in a faraway Western country is, due to such incompatibilities and superstitions, equally difficult for quite a few of us. Nonetheless, many people like myself are objectively very much equipped for such circumstances, with proficiency in languages, a progressive internationalist mindset, and sociable personality, but I have to admit that quite often the bare-bones reason preventing me from smoothly socializing in German society is a huge difference in mentality, habits, and lifestyle, which I can often only find with people of national origin closer to mine. Now, this kind of confession might come off as surprisingly xenophobic, close-minded, or weird, coming from someone with my political orientation, but I assure you that there is a very good reason for this universal feeling. The surface-level difference in mentality and habits is based on a much deeper and materially conditioned socioeconomic rift between the native and immigrant population, a rift which often prevents proper social cohesion in multicultural societies of the West. This chasm that often prevents the two populations from seamlessly melting into one organism, of course, has nothing to do with the racial, ethnic, or religious superiority or inferiority of the native German or immigrant Turk, Croat, or Bulgarian, or the inability of multicultural societies to function properly, but the social and economic context of the respective groups within the imperial core country, and the material origin of this contradictory relation. In other words, alienation and parallel societies are not a product of inherent cultural antagonisms, as right-wingers love to argue, but material socioeconomic ones. More concretely, immigrant workers from the entire world have always had and always will have a seemingly insignificant but actually quite impactful disadvantage within German society, opposed to native Germans, for example. Yes, both are working-class wage laborers, subject to the whim of the German capitalist class. Both are being robbed of their surplus value and coerced by the same state apparatus. However, there is a very significant antagonism between their countries of origin, and consequently between them as members of the same social class, beyond all of the expected class solidarity. By understanding this crucial social dynamic, we will unlock all of the mysteries of the origins of the recent waves of migration, and all of the contradictions of the diaspora in the form of anxieties and misunderstandings that arise between host and immigrant populations. So, let me explain. The incredibly unequal, exploitative, and hegemonic relationship between countries of the imperial core and periphery, between the rich and powerful global north and the backward underbelly of the global south, has created unbearable contradictions within the countries of the overexploited periphery. Rapidly deteriorating and often unbearable living conditions and societal decay have created the perfect conditions for an explosion of immigration and brain drain of low and high-skilled workers. Migrations have of course existed for millennia, but have never been as much of a chronic disease and necessity as in the modern age of globalized capitalism. These people, unable to lead a decent life in the corrupt puppet regime of their country of origin, end up moving to the more prosperous imperial core, which destroyed their homeland in the first place, through ruthless predatory methods and practices whose aim has always been to extract value, material resources, and labor power with the help of the corrupt, local comprador ruling class to feed the parasitic monstrosity of capitalist imperialism, which values the extraction of profit above all else. The well-established mechanics of imperialist domination, including value extraction, superexploitation, global labor arbitrage, unequal exchange, colonial tribute, imperial rent, and open imperialist support for oppressive fascist labor regimes and simultaneous sabotage and overthrow of popular, democratically elected socialist governments, all play their role in the parasitic extraction of value from the global south to the north. These ruthless but highly obscured methods of imperialism and neocolonialism allow the ruling classes of the imperial core the material means to essentially bribe their working class population with the spoils of imperial plunder. So, the average Frenchman, German, and Canadian do not enjoy greater standards of living because their social democratic systems are better, their mentalities or cultural qualities inherently more advanced or civilized than the rest of the world. They enjoy the spoils that their ruling class have extracted through the destruction and destitution of the rest of the world. They are bribed into submission, with the fruits of other people's suffering that sustains their comparably comfortable lifestyles in the form of generous concessions from their ruling class, compelling them to turn a blind eye to massive injustices and subconsciously rationalize them as innately natural phenomena and proof of their natural superiority. Simply put, their quote-unquote superior system of social democracy would not last a single day without the robbery and devastation of the rest of the world. German social democracy would be unsustainable without the dozens of corrupt, kleptocratic dictatorships in the rest of the world. Thus, this incredibly unequal and parasitic geopolitical relationship between countries naturally creates a vacuum of impoverished and super-exploited workers drawn towards those same mountains of value which were stolen from them. The local working class of the global north, whose social benefits and super wages are largely sustained by the parasitic relationship, are then shocked to see the unending rows of funny-looking people whose countries were destroyed, lining up to reap the same benefits that they do. Those same people who've been sewing their t-shirts, cultivating their exotic fruits, and assembling their technologies in abject poverty and inhumane working conditions, far from where the eye can see, have suddenly arrived at their doorstep with silly demands of human rights and dignity. The so-called labor aristocracy, the embourgeoised stratum of the working class of the imperialist countries, subconsciously realizes that their interests might as well be more aligned with their national ruling class than with the working classes of exploited countries, creating an insurmountable rift in the global working class and destroying their solidarity. By understanding that their privileged position is based upon the impoverishment of others, the average Western European will subconsciously assign their privilege to inherent racial and cultural superiority, will develop xenophobic and racist attitudes to rationalize their parasitic economic position and rationalize their hatred and superstition towards people of color. The exploitative relationship between the ruling class of the labor aristocrats' home country towards the rest of the world naturally creates a climate of contempt, distrust, derision, and loathing between the native Western European and the ever-growing diaspora. The diaspora is, in essence, an unwanted byproduct of the destitution and impoverishment of the periphery of imperialism. It is an uncomfortable reminder of the overexploited and wretched state of the majority of this planet, slowly seeping between the cracks of the golden walls of this capitalist promised land. It breaks the illusion of capitalist omnibenevolence and utilitarianism by allowing the excrements and waste products of the imperialist machinery, the wretched wage laborers and vagrants of the disintegrated periphery, to walk on the same pavements and roads of France, the United Kingdom, and United States, and reap the same benefits of their social safety nets instead of, silently accepting their destiny as faraway glorified slaves for Western prosperity. So, all of these factors, which might come off as too abstract, boring, preachy, or even pretentious, are, regardless of your disinterest in engaging with them, the true fundamental material source of all of the issues that we experience in the context of migration and the diaspora. Misunderstandings and judgment among populations of the Third World and their diaspora relatives that we discussed in the first part of the video, and the xenophobic and racist attitudes, the social stratification, discrimination, segregation, not uncommon within the host imperial core country, are both dialectically related phenomena that draw their roots from the criminally uneven, exploitative relationship between countries on a world scale. And this uneven relationship is, to reiterate, by no means based on the superiority of certain cultures, religions, or nations over others, but simply the lucky winners of capitalist uneven development who happen to spawn in a part of the world which had better predispositions for developing a more advanced society, whose advancements have been continually used to oppress, control, and exploit the rest of the world. So, I guess our final conclusion can be summed up as follows. The hundreds of millions of diaspora members, scattered all around the world like myself, like your old friend or relative, are neither lazy parasites who wish to abuse and misuse the benefits of the superior system and culture found in Western Europe by stealing women and jobs and imposing their culture, nor are they self-hating traitors of their homeland who gave up their roots and identity for another man's cursed riches, just to rub it in your face. We are victims of this irrational, destructive, and ruthless system, just like everyone else. Our decision to leave and follow the trail of value and capital that was stolen from us and our children by the most exploitative machinery in human history does not make us better than those who stayed, nor does it render us as traitors of our home country or invaders and parasites of another. All of us would be the happiest if we could have a decent standard of living inside of our home country. My people, culture, language, collective habits, and the place where I spawned on this damned earth are always going to be the dearest to my heart, no matter the comfort, luxury, or privilege that living in a first world country could ever offer. If I was given the opportunity to live with my compatriots in an environment where elementary human needs are met in a reasonable way, and I was offered the same opportunities in terms of education, healthcare, sports, and cultural life as a person from a working class family, I would take that offer in a heartbeat, and I'm sure most diaspora people would as well. I'm obviously infinitely thankful for the chance that life and my parents have given me to form myself as a person, to get a proper education and broaden my horizons, but I am never going to be German. I'll always be a foreigner in someone else's country. I'll always be a pestilence to someone else's fascistic inclinations. A filthy immigrant who came here to steal jobs. And no matter how many friendly and welcoming locals and comrades there may be. Multiculturalism is a beautiful and noble phenomenon that is a natural progression of the globalization of our world. But it is important to recognize that the material origins of multicultural societies directly determine their content and internal contradictions. Under capitalism, multicultural societies are not formed out of the progressive and innate drive to explore the world and live in harmony because we can, but out of the depressing and coercive necessity to have our basic needs met with at least a trace of dignity. Only once the exploitation of man by man and the super-exploitation of nation by nation is overcome and becomes a thing of the past, will all the paths be open for genuine freedom of choice to live and prosper in your home country or explore the wide world out of adventure and curiosity. Until then, only class solidarity that transcends all barriers of language, nationality, chauvinism, and prejudice can allow us to coexist within a system that is inclined to tear us apart.